Hello, my name is Torbjorn Waerner, and it's really a pleasure to have this opportunity to present to you in the CDKL5 Alliance. And I will immediately start to show you some slides. Just give me a moment and I will share my screen here. And there you are. I hope you can also increase this to presentation format. So I hope you can see this. Yes, so my name is Torbjorn Waerner, and I am the head of medical affairs for Zogenix here in Europe. And this presentation I call it Rare Disease Therapies, and I'll immediately jump into what that means. As a company, we are completely dedicated to innovative treatments for not specifically just, or not broadly just rare diseases, but really rare epilepsies or developmental epileptic encephalopathies. We are a small company, a small biopharmaceutical company, but we are growing. For many years, this company was a very small company placed in San Francisco in the United States. The company is totally 20 years old, but about 7-8 years ago, it changed its focus and became a company dedicated to developing treatments for developmental epileptic encephalopathies. Until about 2 years ago, that was about 50-60 people doing this work. But for the last 2 years, the company has started to grow quite a lot, so much that even this slide is obsolete. We are now globally more around 400 people. The majority of those people are in the United States, approximately 60 employees here in Europe, and a very, very small team in Japan. I will come back to our disease areas in a few minutes and talk a bit more about them, but as I've already mentioned, the focus area is really developmental epileptic encephalopathies, and our main project there in that area is called ZX008, targeting Drawbase Syndrome and Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, and also additional rare childhood epilepsies. But we're also looking into gene therapy for rare epilepsies, and we do have a project for something called the mitochondrial deficiency disease. This slide simply shows the global leadership team or the executive team, which is the headquarters team in San Francisco, United States. I'm not going to say more words about them. We do also, as I mentioned, have a small team here in Europe. The European headquarters are in Maidenhead, outside London, UK, where we are approximately 35-40 people. The European team is headed up by myself as the medical lead, and we also have Gavin Barker, who is the head of the commercial organization here in Europe. We do have very, very small units also in France, Italy, Germany, and Spain. And together we are trying to support our business all over Europe. Any company would have what we call values that are supposed to characterize us and create the culture that we're working in. And our values are on this slide. We have 4 C's and 1 E. Three C's and 1 E. The 3 C's represent compassion, courage, collaboration, and excellence. I think the important message on this slide is really what it says in the beginning, that this is a culture of caring, and that we've built a culture of caring about each other and the patients and the families we serve. I would like to emphasize that because I've been in the company for about 1.5 years now. Any company nowadays, any pharmaceutical company nowadays would say that they are patient-centric or focus on the patient and patient needs. In some ways and forms, that is always true, but it comes out in very different ways. And I would like to say that the very first impression I got when I started to talk to people in this company during the recruitment phase was that they were completely dedicated to make a difference to the patients we're serving, to the kids we're serving, and to the families in need to support their kids with the diseases. Patient is always in focus in this company. The compassion really came out very strongly, and that is very encouraging and inspiring to me and to the staff. I already mentioned the therapeutic areas we're focusing on. The biggest area is the childhood onset developmental epileptic encephalopathies. So we are really primarily focusing on these rare diseases, childhood onset diseases with difficult, complex, severe, difficult to treat seizures, but also complications in terms of cognitive, behavioral, or motor impairment, and oftentimes also increased risk of mortality or death. Patients that require a lot of support and a lot of care, and also parents or carers that are very, very engaged, but also very burdened by these disabling disorders. Our other big area is here called mitochondrial deficiency disease, or it's called TK2D, thymidine kinase 2 deficiency, which also is a genetic disease. It's a neuromuscular disease. I'll talk a bit more about it on a later slide, so I'll just go on. So a few more words about our key disease areas right now. The ZX008 program, that has been the key development program for 7-8 years now, was primarily targeting Drawbase syndrome. Drawbase syndrome is a very rare developmental epileptic encephalopathy. It's a childhood onset disease, and as you may know or may not know, these are kids that are born as completely normal kids. Around the year 1 years of age, they have their first seizures, and that is not necessarily alarming. But after that, you see a development with increasing burden of seizures, increasing frequency of very complex, difficult seizures, and then comes cognitive, developmental impairment, behavioral disturbances, motor impairment. It's mentioned here that it's a very rare disease. We're talking about 1 out of 20,000 born kids that develop this. It's a clinical disease, as we call it. It's based on the symptoms you see, but at least 80% of these kids have a mutation in a gene called ST1A. These seizures are difficult to treat, and many of the current anti-epileptic drugs are not very efficient or can even worsen the condition for these kids. Many of them, as you see here, 72% at least, end up taking many of these drugs together, at least 3 of them, and still have oftentimes not very well controlled seizures. I've already mentioned that this is a disease with significant morbidity. There's a high level of seizures, a high frequency of seizures. Some of these kids we're talking about 20, 30, 40, maybe even more seizures per month. And there's also clearly a high risk of early death, primarily from SUDEP, sudden death in epilepsy, or status epilepticus. This is, of course, a very scary disease, high burden to the whole family, to the parents. We have already approval for treatment of this disorder, and I'll come back to that in my second last slide. The second disease we're targeting with the same project, the ZX008, is Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. There's some similarities, quite a few similarities, I would say. This is also a childhood onset epilepsy. Starts slightly later than Drawbase syndrome. As Drawbase syndrome, it's patients with a high seizure burden, significant morbidity, with also cognitive, behavioral, and motor impairment. These are also kids that need a lot of support, a lot of care. So also kids with a higher risk of status epilepticus and even early death. Slightly more frequent than Drawbase syndrome, are some differences to Drawbase syndrome in terms of what the types of seizures you see, and also that this is more heterogeneous in terms of the causation of the disease. There's no clear genetic factor that leads to Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. I've already mentioned that our third disease area is different. It's a neuromuscular disease. It's called thymidine kinase 2 deficiency. This is even more rare. This is ultra rare, and we have only maybe 100 patients described in the world that now have this disease. It was described only in 2001, so we will recognize more of the patients when this disease become a bit more known. It's a quite scary disease. These are also kids that are born as completely normal kids. For at least more than half of these patients, the disease starts in childhood, and for 40% of them, it starts really in very early childhood. And what you see is a progressing condition with muscle weakness. It starts with difficulties, for the baby to sit up, walk, use their arms, and then this progresses with difficulties breathing, even eating, and this also, if it starts early on, has a very high likelihood to lead to early death. And this disease currently have no known treatment at all. We have obviously high hopes for the treatment we are developing. This is just a summary or an overview to mention that the ZX008 is already approved for the treatment of Drawbase syndrome in United States and Europe, and also in the process of being approved, we hope, in Japan for the same condition. And we have hopes to get this approved also for the treatment of Lennox-Gastaut syndrome in the United States and Europe. The trials have been concluded. What is not on this slide is what I mentioned before, that we are now also targeting additional rare childhood epilepsies, which I think is very relevant for you in this group to hear. Our second big project is, which is very early, is to try to develop gene therapies for these rare treatment-resistant childhood epilepsies, some of them. And the third area is the thymidine kinase 2 deficiency treatment we're developing. In my very last slide, I would like to say that what is really very important for us is the partnership we have with both the external medical community and the external patient and caregiver community. For numerous reasons, it's impossible for a pharmaceutical company to develop treatments in isolation. We need to communicate with the external world for different reasons, and so do we. We're a small company, but we have a strong collaboration. If we start to focus on the mid column, we have strong collaboration with the scientific external community. We are collaborating with external investigators that do our clinical trials. We support external investigators with research grants, and we also have scientific discussions with the external community. We also collaborate with the healthcare community in terms of providing medical education, workshops, and scientific exchange and discussions. But the left slide is not the least important. Collaboration, I would say, is crucially important. We're also very proud to have a strong collaboration with patient and caregiver communities. This is crucially important for us. It gives us inspiration, it gives us feedback, it explains to us what we need to focus on, and hopefully we can return that by supporting the patient and caregiver communities. Which I think is a good way of ending this presentation today, that I've been able to tell you about Zogenix, and that I do hope that we will have a fruitful and good collaboration going forward. Thank you very much indeed.